Hey, Pete Winarski here, and I am thrilled to be here once more with you on Business Results Radio and Business Results TV in this case, because I'm recording this on a video as well. I want to share a situation that has come up recently. This was a conversation I had with the head of HR at a particular site, so at one of our clients. And we're going to keep all the names out of this because, I don't want this to spill over, but it's a situation that's really interesting. Let me just tee it up. So this is a site that was underperforming. Then a new site leader was hired on, and the site leader started to get results in an amazing way. So the results, which were bad, became better, almost to the point that I'd say they're really good. They're not quite excellent, but they're better, right? And what started to happen was there was some behind the scenes activity of how that leader was behaving with the team that, let's just call it unacceptable practices, but they were sort of behind the scenes. So you wouldn't know about it on the surface. Certainly, the senior up people who are um, have to manage multiple sites, and then corporate who, this is one division of multiple divisions. What they see is the results. That's all they see, right? They don't have any visibility. So this HR leader was like right thrown in the middle and starting to hear buzz from, sort of the shop floor, if you will, right, coming up and describing, hey, here are all these things going on. Here's what so and so did or said or whatever. That is just like, oh my God, not acceptable. So that's the situation that came up, which triggers me to have this conversation with you guys today. So the point is this: what do you do when there's a results problem? What do you do when there's a behaviors problem? And how do you make sure that one doesn't trump the other? It's kind of like who wins the showdown battle, right? And I'll tell you that in the near term, in the short term, when especially corporate environments where you're up against the wall, almost always, almost 100% of the time, results will win that fight, right? So you put them in a cage and let them go at it. Results will get bloodied up, behaviors will get bloodied up, but in the end, results will, Jesus, knocked over, like almost hit my mug there. Um, Results will end up beating up on behaviors, and it's just that's just the way of it. It's the way of the world right now, especially in the corporate environment where you've got huge corporations, billions in revenue, and that's what's happening, right? They've got to deliver to the shareholders. The shareholders want bottom line results. What's my return on my investment? Very simple. What's my return on my investment? So they need the profitability and the cash flow to be generating bigger numbers to justify the investment. Obviously, stock price goes up equals when it's a public company, anyways, as the stock price goes up, the ROI back to the investors, the shareholders, goes up. So that dynamic is very real. So in the short term, behaviors may take a back seat. Now, that's a big problem in the long term because now what you're doing is you're putting your company at risk, you're putting your processes at risk, your culture at risk, the individuals who you rely on to deliver results for you. If they're not happy, they're gonna bust. They're out. I'm leaving, right? So, this is the challenge, the balance between results versus behavior. So, let's talk about results first. So, the results process, this is pretty known out there in the world how to define the targets, the metrics, what is it we're measuring, what is it we're setting for targets, and then let's put some plans behind them. Let's set up some teams. Let's create the ownership. Let's create a sense of alignment so that, across the board, let's not have too many of them, because if you have too many, now everybody's spread super thin. So let's create some focus. There's a whole methodology that drives strategic focus and alignment that we use. We call it CSEE, Strategy, Engagement, Execution. That really gets into the mechanics of how to do what I'm describing here. But in essence, it's getting into who owns what, who's the accountable metric owner, one owner for one metric with the targets associated with that one metric, right? So you don't spread it out too far. What's the action plan behind what you're expected to deliver, right? So now you've got, there's some cause and effect. You would expect that if I do these things on my plan, I will deliver these results, right? So that's basically what that looks like. And then you get into making sure you're executing well, the strategy, engagement, execution, right? So you want to create the strategy, engage the team members. This ought to sound really familiar if you listen to the podcast on Business Results Radio about accountability through engagement. There's that magic word again. So engaging the team in the same way that you would through an accountability through engagement process, and then making sure that you have the ability to execute and execute well. Execution is everything, by the way. You can have a sort of an okay strategy, but if you execute it well, then your results may end up being better than having a pristine strategy and executing poorly, right? So that's another debate for another day, but let me just call attention to that. So if you think about, how am I doing? Am I on track? Am I off track? If you create some milestones, these could be monthly milestones, weekly milestones, sometimes longer term quarterly milestones, having progress reviews set up to touch base, make sure that you're making the progress that you thought you would, and when you're falling short, engaging into the problem solving conversations and discussion, data based problem solving, not emotional based problem solving, and strive to solve whatever the issues are to keep you on track with the trajectory that you planned when you created that plan. So that's the results side. There's other nuances to that, but that's essentially what we're describing and looking for. On the behavior side, this is a little trickier because you expect that, okay, human beings as managers, you get to a certain point, you just kind of expect a certain level of professional behavior. You expect everyone to work together. Now, if you have a well-defined culture, your core values are clear, the attributes of the culture that you want to have are really clear, then it becomes a little bit of an easier exercise for someone who's already working within that environment to essentially play by the rules that you've defined, right? So your culture is how work gets done. It's the sum of everyone's beliefs, thoughts, and behaviors. And of course, behaviors are the only thing you could see. What you do, what you say, that sort of thing is a behavior that's visible to the naked eye. Whereas what you're thinking and the beliefs behind that thinking of what drives you to shape your thinking and then shape what you do and how you react, that's invisible. However, that's super powerful and that's important to identify. That's below the surface. If you were an iceberg, that's all of the part of the iceberg that's under the surface, right? You've seen those graphics, the analogies where what's visible is that top maybe 10 or 20%. The rest, 70 to 90% of the iceberg is below the surface. It's not visible. That's the issue with your culture, right? You've got all these individuals who have their own beliefs and behaviors, thoughts and beliefs that drive their behaviors, the behaviors being the only part that's visible. So, if you've got people in your existing company, your team who are part of that culture, have been part of the culture, have been there a while, then it's a little bit easier. But if you inject a new person, so you hire someone from the outside, your expectation might be that they're going to follow along in the same way from a behavior standpoint. But if you've got somebody who, behind the scenes is, starting to, say and do things that are manipulative, or put someone down and using harsh language, or let's just keep brainstorming. What else might they do? They might pit two team members against one another in an unproductive way. Sometimes team competition in a playful way can work out really, really well, but in a cutthroat way where someone, back to the cage match, someone lives. It's like gladiators. Someone doesn't live. That's not cool, right? So that does more damage than good. These sorts of behaviors. What if that's how they manage to be successful over the course of their career, and that's all they know, and they've got other things going on behind the scenes from their beliefs and their thought processes, and they might think, oh, I've got to protect myself, or I have to do it this way. I mean, there's probably some core fears that they have that you don't even know about. So let's not get into the psychology behind this. That's more for what we do in our executive mentoring exercises. So let's put that aside for the moment. But just recognize some of those things could be happening that are creating the behaviors. So how do you correct the behaviors in the first place? Well, aside from getting into an executive mentoring sort of relationship where one of our executive mentors works with you to help figure out if there are some of those things, and then smooth over and maybe even course correct on thought processes and course correct on the underlying beliefs. Until then, the fundamental thing you could do is address what's visible. And you as a leader could do this right now. And what I'd like to suggest is what we call the script. I'm going to write it down. What did I call this thing? It's the simple expectation script, right? The simple expectation script helps define what's expected and then give feedback to how you're doing versus those expectations. So it sounds like this basically. Here's what I expect. Let me describe that to you. Then here's how you're doing against that expectation. So here's what I expect, and here's how you're doing. On track, off track, better than, on par, or not as good as, right? So here's what I expect, here's how you're doing versus that expectation. I'm happy or I'm not happy, right? Some variation of setting expectation, giving feedback, now as the leader, thumbs up or thumbs down. And it's, obviously it's not expressed exactly that way, but if you simplify your language, you could use I'm happy and here's why, or I'm not happy and here's why, or I'm happy that this, but I'm not happy that this, right? So you can start to clarify, and in that conversation, see, people want to be heard. They want feedback so that they know where they stand, especially depending on who you're giving feedback to. If it's someone who's been around for decades in the working world, they may be a little bit more entrenched in their ways. Certainly, the younger generations, the millennials, one of the characteristics of the millennial generation as a group, as a demographic group, want feedback. It's one they seek feedback. How am I doing? Give me my feedback so I can make an assessment. And really what they're doing is they're also looking for, and this is in general for everyone, people want to know that it's okay, they're included, they're looking for approval. And everyone, doesn't matter the age group, doesn't matter the demographic, people seek approval. So for you to say, here's what I expect, here's how you're doing versus that expectation. I'm happy with this part. So good on you. I'm not so happy about this part. Let's talk about that. And then the last part of the conversation is, so based on all of that, now let's talk about next steps. Let's talk about what has to happen next. By the way, before I forget, and this is critical, use this conversation, this simple expectation script on things that are going well, not just things that are not going well. And the reason for that is you don't want someone to only think, uh-oh, here comes the boss. They're starting with, here's what I expect. And like, oh, I did it again. I blew it. I'm in trouble. I'm the slug of the universe, whatever. Um, you want to build this trust and rapport and make this a common conversation. Not just you as the leader to your team, but spread this out so that it's a conversation that is, hey, let's talk, uh, do a quick check-in. So here's what I expect. I expect that you're building your team and getting them to take on these activities on their own without you diving in and sort of, controlling every minute, because we want them to think on their own. How you're doing against that, what I'm noticing is that there are times when you're dropping into a conversation and you just kind of take over, right? You are, you give them a chance to start talking, but then you jump in and you take over and you do all the rest of the talking from there, which I believe is in essence shutting them down. You start doing the thinking for them, which I believe that they are interpreting as, oh, this person doesn't trust me any longer, or they're not giving me the freedom I need, which ends up having a result of closing them down. So I'm happy that the team is performing, but I'm not happy that they're not developing to the level that I want them to develop. And I'm not happy that you're feeling that you need to jump in. So let's talk about that. What do you think's going on there? So here's the dialogue part, right? Let's talk about that. Ah, okay, yeah, gee, I didn't know I was doing that. That's a common response. Or, yeah, I know we talked about that, a couple weeks ago, and yeah, I'm so, high driven that I just can't help myself. I want to jump in. I want to help out. I want to jump in and shape the answer. And so I just like bleh, throw it up. And I get it. I hear you. Or it might be, well, wait a minute, boss. I don't agree that I'm diving in and taking over. I'm coaching them. I'm giving them advice. Right? So let's say that's the way the conversation goes. Now you're in a dialogue. Now, if you as the leader base it on your observations, there's another whole model that we can talk about, which is keeping it fact based, separating out your facts from your opinions, and being really clear about your facts and your opinions, and also separating out your emotions. So getting to finally what you want at the end. So that could look like this, where it's like, okay, well, I observed so and so said this, and then you said this. Those are just facts, just observations. Obviously, fact-based could be numbers-driven, but let's just, we're talking behaviors here, so let's go in that direction. So, Jimmy was describing what his plan was, and you then jumped in. My perception is that you jumped in, but what you said was, I want you to not do that step. I want you to do this other step instead. So my opinion, separating out facts from opinion, my opinion is that you started to jump in before letting them finish, before Jimmy could finish. And my belief about that is that that will shut Jimmy down. On the emotion side, if there are any, this is recognizing that sometimes people get emotional about their conversations. It just make sure that the emotions are carved out separately. So if you're mad about it, you say, listen, I'm really upset about this one thing. I'm pissed at the fact that you cut him off. I mean, if that's what you are, share it. Get it out there. Don't hide it. Just put it out. I'm upset. I'm mad. I'm disappointed. Right? These are common leadership things. Angry, disappointment, happy, thrilled. Those types of things. And so here's what I would like to see, right? So get into conversation about that. So we started with the simple expectation script, and then we went into this other simple script. But let's get back to the simple expectation script. So here's what I expect. Here's how you're doing against that expectation. I'm happy or I'm not happy. And based on that, let's talk about next steps. So, conversation that helps to solidify and get someone to at least appreciate and understand what is expected and what's acceptable against that expectation. Now, from that, you can start to move behavior and modify and mold behavior. Notice that none of this has anything to do with you're in trouble, you're on a performance improvement plan, we're going to put you in timeout, et cetera, et cetera. All of those could happen if you had to get there, but that's not where we're starting. We want to get to a place where you define your expectations, you help someone navigate and course correct. You can help coach them along, but ultimately, behaviors acceptable, not acceptable. Simple ones from times when I was a supervisor and I had my my first line people in group, they were group leader roles. So I'm training them to be an extension of me and how I think. These are hourly people, remember, and they end up yelling at someone. I'm like, all right, hang on, let's chat. Listen, my expectation is that you can communicate without yelling at somebody, and what I just observed was you were yelling at them. So my expectation, no yelling. How you're doing against that expectation, yelling. I'm not happy about that. Let's talk about what you can do next. Let's talk about how you can communicate without having to be mad and yell and all that. So, simple expectation script happens to be applicable and useful for modifying and giving feedback on behaviors all over the place all the time. So, here's the risk. If you allow toxic behaviors to hang out in your team, in your company, over time, and it's just like, what else is toxic? Drinking too much and having a hangover the next day, or smoking cigarettes and having lung cancer 20 years later, right? So these are the sorts of things that toxic behaviors create. It may be that you got the job done today, all right, so that you were under pressure, you had to deliver results, so you amped it up and you bulldozed your way through, knocking people over in your wake, but you got the job done. In the short term, you might actually get an attaboy because people didn't know otherwise how you managed to get those results. Yet, and here's the powerful and important thing, you had key people that you just, in essence, ran over, and they didn't like that. And now they're like, well, I'm not working for this person anymore. I'm out of here. I'm leaving my company. I'm looking for another job. And the next thing you know, you get this mass exodus. And I've seen that in companies actually, both out in the corporate world when I was in the corporate world environment, and also working with clients, where all of a sudden, the org change, person gets promoted, new president comes in with a style that is just like, leaving a mess all over the place behaviorally, because they were, just the bull in the china shop, and the bull in the china shop breaks the china. That's the problem, right? So you don't want that from a behavior standpoint. By the way, that was figured out, and that person didn't last more than about a year. So these things, they do have a way of cleaning themselves up, but there was some exodus, right? There was a mass exodus during that time frame, and that's kind of how the toxic behavior finally was figured out. As they were driving for results, but doing it in a way that was not consistent with the values of the company and with the culture that the team had in place. The new guy comes in, makes a mess, and then next thing you know, you're like, whoops, all these key people are leaving, and you've got folks who are doing nothing but recruiting now, and they're not spending any time on really making the results, making processes better, making changes, right? So that's the risk. So toxic behaviors in the short term might go unnoticed, but in the long term can absolutely destroy your team and your company if you're not careful. So that's the message for today. Behaviors versus results. Who wins that fight? It's not really a fight. Let's find them a way to coexist. I used the battle analogy earlier with the cage match, but let's think of how do you get them to coexist. And by the way, that simple expectation script, which is super helpful on behaviors, you can also use that on the results side. I expect 95% on time delivery, and we're at 90% on time delivery. I'm not happy about that. Our customers aren't happy about that. Let's talk about what we can do to get it back up. So that conversation comes out during the management systems that we highlighted earlier when you talk about results and you're measuring results and who owns what, who's accountable for what. You can still embed the simple expectation script into that. So let me wrap up this way. I'm excited that there is a way to get excellent results, have dynamic, positive behaviors, and make your team better, make your team more capable. To me, that's the only way to do it. So if you're in a place where you've got a situation where somebody's just knocking over everyone else and creating the bull in China shop effect, and they're breaking the china and people are not happy and you're creating some damage, you do have to proactively address that. Take a look, figure out what to do, weigh in. If it's over your head, seek help. That's part of what executive mentoring is all about. So dig into that. But certainly look for ways to find a way to elevate your team, correct the behaviors, because chances are you hired this person in the first place, or maybe they're a long-term person who just got promoted to a new role, or maybe there's some other shift that has happened that has created this dynamic. Correct the dynamic and think about the long term. Get the short-term results where you need to. Do it in a way that's consistent with the behaviors you want to see in the company, and you'll be better off. All right, Pete Winiarski here, and we'll chat with you soon.